Oh, hey, good evening. How are you doing this evening? Thanks for stopping by my broadcast here. Tonight we'll be talking about slicer program profiles on DDD projects. I've just been printing off some clips. These clips are kind of great. Little bitty things, you know what they are. Oh, hey, good evening. How are you They kind of just disappear whenever you flip them off the board. My broadcast here. Tonight we'll be talking about slicer program profiles. Hang on. DDD projects. I just been printing off some. Yep, sorry about that. Audio is bleeding over. Anyway, first attempt here, so we'll see how it goes. Anyway, I like to print off these C clips because they always pop off your printer, go flying across the room, and you can never seem to find them when you need them. So, always a nice little print to have around. Speaking of things coming up, if you happen to be in the Indiana area, in the Midwest, or Illinois, coming up in June is MRF, which is the Midwest Rip Rap Festival. It is the largest 3D printing festival in the Midwest, and it is located in beautiful Goshen, Indiana. So it's about 2 hours north of Indianapolis, maybe an hour and a half south of Chicago. So not too bad of a drive for a weekend. Come up Friday on the June 12th, and the vendors are setting up and everybody. And then Saturday is an all-day event. Come see the latest, greatest printer equipment and vendors. And the neat thing about MRF is even people like myself can show up and have a table. The tables are free for individuals, and you can show off what you like to print, what you're selling, what you're doing. Maybe you've got a special project you've been working on, and you can get that out to the public, so it comes in handy. Lots of vendors there. Prusa is going to be there. Polymaker Filament, Atomic Filament said they're going to be there. Soriatech. I usually think of resin printing when I think of Soriatech, but they do make some good TPU that I've used before. LEO Motors. Who else? There's about 20 vendors that'll be there. Oh, including Cookie CAD. So if you want to print chocolate, you can come see their Cocoa Press. I think it's still called Cocoa Press chocolate printer. It's kind of cool. I'll be running a event called the Filament Exchange. So if you've ever bought a roll of filament, maybe you bought ASA and you should have bought PETG, and it's sitting on your shelf. What do you do with it? Well, bring it with you to the event. We'll have an exchange table. You can drop your filament off and see what other people have dropped off and take a new roll. Half rolls, quarter rolls, full rolls. If you're a vendor and want to get some filament out to the people, feel free to drop a few off at the table as well. And that's always kind of fun because I get to talk and meet you all and see what you're printing. So keep that in mind at MRF, the Filament Exchange. Lots of fun. So let's slide on over to the desk here and let's start looking at printer slicers. So we're going to start with Orca Slicer here. This is the FlashStudio version for the AD5X printer and for the upcoming Creator 5 and Creator 5 Pro toolhead printer. A few of you have gotten those. You're lucky. I'm still waiting on my email. I did not pay the extra $50 to get it air shipped. Maybe I should have, but oh well. It'll get here eventually. Until then, I've got the FlashForge 85X, which is a 4-color printer, and we'll go through some color or some slicer settings that I like to use that improves my prints. These will be available at the end of the chat. I'll throw them in, or you can get them on our Facebook group, the AD5X FlashForge user group. So let's start off. We'll pick our printer. And we'll close this. Then we'll pick our printer. One setting in your printer you probably want to start off with. I'm not going to get too deep into particular printers, so that if you have Creality or Bamboo or some other brand, you can also use these type of settings. But under extruder on Z-Hop on surface, set for all surfaces. This causes the printer bed to move up and down a lot more than it probably really needs to. So I like to use top only. So we'll talk about that in a minute, but keep that in mind. Switch that to top only. And then one other odd setting that I'll mention is in the filament, whatever filament you're using. If you go to Edit, scroll all the way down to the bottom under filament, is max volume speed. This is how fast the overall printer can print. These printers nowadays, the modern ones, are probably around 30 to 32 millimeters per second, but you have to be printing pretty thin to hit that. It's a numerical calculation. Typically, I would say anywhere between 18, maybe for PETG, 20 for silk, and 22 is usually what I run for PETG, PLA, those sort of filaments. So you'll have to come up with your own settings for the rest of the filaments because there are far too many to name. If you stop by my website, we have an Amazon link and you can see some of the filament I've tried out over the last few months, and grab yourself some and have some fun. So let's get into the good stuff. Let's clear off this page real quick. And let's throw in some shapes here just so we have some idea what's going on. Put some cubes, some cylinders, and I need 2 cones. Go ahead and arrange those. 1 more cone. And with this cone, we're going to go ahead and flip it upside down just for demonstration. And we want to drop that down just a little bit. There we go. All right. Let's start off with layer height over here. This is probably the most common settings you'll start out with. 2 is pretty common. If we slice our page and we look at it, layer height is the individual lines on an object. These little orange ones. Now just a quick note, up here in the slicer you have line type, so if you want to drill down in the pictures, you can. If I click on outer wall, you'll notice the orange disappears, so that's our outer wall. If I click the yellow on inner wall, that gets rid of our inner wall. If you're wondering what this red stuff is, that's probably sparse infill. Down here at the bottom, might be solid infill. Yeah, there we go. Turn that on and off. And then your bottom surface is this purple one. Top surface is this red one. So that'll give you an idea of what we're looking at as we go through these different settings. Let me show you 2 more real quick while I'm thinking about it. Let me rotate this. This white line right down the middle, especially on this cone. If you're printing cups or vases or those little sockets, or if you're into the coolers, you may end up with this big fat line right down the middle. That is the seam. We'll explain what to do to get rid of that in a little bit. So that's just a few of the things going on there. So let's start off with layer height. 2 is pretty typical. I actually like to use 1.8. It's a little bit finer. It seems to do a little bit better job. Gives you a little more cleaner look. You can go down further if you want, but that tends to stick when using a 4.4 nozzle. The next one I like to change is the first layer height. I like to make that 3. And that, we'll pull it up here. We'll slide all the way to the bottom of our print, is this first layer here. What is this thickness of these going to be? 0.3. May need to do 0.5 if you're having problems getting things to stick or look right. But that helps one stick to the bed, and if you have what's called elephant foot around the edges, that helps take care of some of that. Next, if we move on down to line width, you'll notice these different layers that we've already kind of talked about are all different sizes, and that just drives me crazy. 4.2 is good. I like to make them all exactly the same. That way, when they all line up, they're nice and even, and they look good together. Now, here we go. Section we're going to talk about, seams. Let's pull this all the way back up. Oops, I grabbed both of them. Careful. There we go. All right, this ugly little line. If you notice, this is the front of our bed, That line is here in front. So the seam is that white line. If I click on a line, I have a lot of choices here. If I click back and slice the page again, you notice it's gone, but not really. It's now on the back of the print. So that's usually a pretty good option if you're doing vases and that sort of thing. You can hide them back there. I tend to use a line. I don't do many vases, but I do planters and flower pots. So there's a little more texture than being just straight up. So I can get away with a line. But as we look in here, we're going to scroll in pretty close. We're going to go down. And if we use this bottom lever, we can actually see where these lines get drawn in. But you notice that gap? It's got a 10% gap. Why do we have a gap there? That never really made sense to me. So we could change that gap to 0. And that will fill in that gap a whole lot. But actually what I like to do is set it at negative 0.01. And that actually causes it to go slightly over and connect. I think it looks better and it seems to work pretty well for me. So that's kind of the setting I like for seams. You can go ahead and give that a try as you want. Make small changes when you're doing these, not all of them at once, because you'll never figure out which ones you did. So just work on that. If we go down to ironing, ironing is a pretty popular and debatable setting. What ironing does is after it prints this final top surface, it comes back with just the hot end and a tad bit of filament, and it tries to smooth that out to give your top surface a nice smooth look. I don't like it. It usually looks melted and kind of goopy. So I tend to leave ironing off, and I'll show you a couple other ways how to fix the top layer so it looks good. The next one I like to change is wall generator. I like to switch it to Arcane. Classic is what they had originally came up with. The Arcane is a new algorithm in the back end of the software that helps speed up the way things print and the way they look and the way the lines are drawn. So switch over that. It should improve speed a little bit and make your prints better. Next thing we'll look at, let's see, flow. We'll scroll down. Nope. Next one under walls. So remember, walls are the sides here, the outer wall and the inner wall. And what we're going to look at is this option called wall print order. You ready for a tongue twister? It's inner, outer, outer, inner, or inner, outer, inner. That's confusing, isn't it? So what it is basically, if we start with inner and then do outer, it's going to print this inner wall first. As your nozzle comes around, it'll print that one first, and then it prints your outer wall, like the orange here that we just put up. The advantage of that is if you have a part that has an overhang, it's printing this inside circle first or area. That gives the orange or the outer side something to hang on to as opposed to just floating out there. However, the downside is if you need a part to be exactly accurate to the millimeter, it may be off slightly. So in that case, you would want to switch. You would want to do outer inner. So what this does, it prints the outside circle first, the orange, and then it prints the inner wall. The advantage of that is you have the setting. It matches the size that you made your part. So there's a little more accurate doing that. Now to get really confusing, inner, outer, inner. Same philosophy here. The trick is you have to have 3 walls. In our picture here, we only have 2 walls. 1, 2. If I had a third one, then we would use inner, outer, inner. And that just happens to improve strength. But for now, we're just going to leave it inner, outer. Next one I'm going to scroll down to is top surface flow. Remember, we're going back to the top. And we'll also look at another one, bottom surface. That's the very bottom one. I like to bump this up just a tad bit to 1.05. You can play with this and set them to your liking. anywhere between 0.97 and about 1.05 is usually pretty good. It's a little bit of a preference. So what happens with this is, if we change the bottom, that small gap in between the lines, because your flow, how much filament your printer is pushing out, tends to fill that in a bit better. And that also works on the top surface. So you don't have lines, it's thicker lines to a bit. That'll help improve your top quality. Now, we're going to move on to the second tab, which is strength. How strong are we going to make this? Earlier we talked about inner and outer loops. If we do 3 here, take a quick look, you now see we have 3 lines, 1 outer and 2 inner. If you need a stronger part, you can always increase the walls. But for most things, 2 walls is okay. If you're doing flexy animals or flexible parts, I would do 3, maybe 4. That gives those inner circles a lot more strength to hold together. Next, we go to top layers. We're back to that top. How are we going to improve the look of this top layer? For me, I like 6 layers, and I want the thickness to be 1.2 millimeters. Let me show you what that exactly looks like. As you can see, that's our top layer. Now we'll count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we have 6 layers between where it's printing infill and then jumps up to the next layer. What that does is, if you're printing a big flat object, it allows enough surface area so you don't have holes in your print, and it makes it look a little better. Now for the top, I like to switch from monotonic. I like to use the Hilbert curve. It adds a little bit of print time. Yes, it does. But I think the overall quality is a little bit better. And the reason I think that is because when you use this particular pattern, it tends to match what's on the bottom of your build plate if you're not using a smooth build plate. And as we see later, we'll turn on fuzzy skin, which will help hide some of these other lines. And so those things tend to work together. So I'll add a few more minutes to the print by adding Hilbert curve, and it looks good. Bottom layer 3 is great. We'll switch down here and scroll to the bottom. Again, well, there's our bottom layer, 1, 2, 3, before it starts printing our infill. 3 is good. I like the thickness to be 0.6 on that, just to make sure. What you need to watch for here is if you're printing vases or something that you need to hold water, you need to double that. So make it 6 and make it 1.2, just like we did the top. That should print enough lines and layers to keep water from leaking through that, typically. If not, then you can go up to, how many ever lines or layers here you want to make that improvement. And finally, the bottom surface, I would probably not use monotonic. I would probably use rectilinear, but again, I like Hilbert curve. It just makes it consistent. That way the top and the bottom match, and I like the look of it. Scrolling down is infill. That is the exciting part in the middle, this red part here. Grid is, well, let's start here. Infill density. I typically reduce everything to 10%. If you have enough walls, it's better than having infill, but you still need to have some, like we see here when it tries to print across the top. You got to have something to cover those holes. So 10% is usually pretty good. A neat little trick if you want a really stronger part is fill line multi-fill. If I turn this up to 2 and slice, you can see we now get 2 lines in the middle in the infill. We turn it up to 3, we'll get 3 lines. Takes a little more time, but makes a really solid part. But for now, we're just going to leave that at 1. Grid is the typical infill, and grid is horrible for infill. Don't use it. Use either rectilinear, which I'm going to use here. A lot of people like to use, where is it? Hiding somewhere, gyroid. Gyroid's kind of cool looking. It gives you this kind of wavy pattern. It's pretty consistent and fills up your print pretty well, but it takes a little bit of time. So I like to keep it simple at rectilinear. And the reason not to use grid, just in case you're wondering, is as this draws the lines. Can we slow it down here and see it draw the lines? Here, it makes a crisscross over the original line, and that leaves a little bump. And over time, those collect up and will cause your printer to skew or skip and just kind of makes a mess of your printer. So, yeah, make sure you change that. So what else do we have under strength? Those are it for strength. Now let's move on to speed. Let's see if we can bump this puppy up a bit. All right, first layer. Now that we have our infill, first layer, this can be easily bumped up to 60. And we can double, well, more than double, or not quite double, the first layer. So we'll speed that up a bit. Now remember, we talked earlier about volumetric speed. Volumetric is the overall speed. These are focusing on just the individual parts. So some of these might be higher, but when the hot end goes to melt the filament, if it can't keep up with these speeds, it defaults to what your filament setting is. So for me, outer walls can be 200. I like to bump that up to 300. Inner wall 300 is fine. Sparse infill, we'll leave most of these alone except for top surfaces. Back to that top surface, how do we make it look good? We're going to slow that down just a tad bit to 120. And that way it will make that a little cleaner as it works. Now we get into travel speed. Travel speed, take a quick look here. We'll turn it on. See all these lines? This is where your print head is moving. Oops. While it prints and moves around the printer. Typically it's set at 500. One of the selling points of this printer is it's go up to 20,000. So let's kick that puppy up. So when it's just moving around, it moves a little quicker. Shouldn't be any problem. The next one I'm going to change is normal printing. Normal printing, again, let's bump that puppy up. You could play with these, but I've been pretty happy with these settings. Outer wall, I'm going to slow the outer wall down from 20 to 8, and I'm going to do the same thing with the inner wall. Feel free to play with those. Adjust them slightly as you feel the need to, and that will make an improvement. We are also going to change travel down to 20. And for the rest of these settings, we're going to leave them pretty much the same under speed. And we'll move on to supports. Dreaded supports. I printed this big thing and now I can't get the supports off. How many times has that happened to you? Well, let's see. First, we'll enable supports. The type of supports I like to use is tree supports on auto, and I like to use the slim ones. We'll slice this real quick, and we'll scroll down. See if I can get it in the screen pretty well here. And there we go. We can see how the supports are designed. Oops, wrong screen, sorry. You can see there's a lot of plastic there, as we got rims and inside fillings. So let's clean that up just a little bit by changing our support settings. First is build plate only. We only want supports growing from the build plate up to the actual item. You don't want, in the case up piece of plastic here and then connecting to another part. Gets a little messy. Then you got a mark on the bottom part and a mark on the top part. So build plate only works pretty well. Rafts, we don't want any rafts. And top Z distance is the next thing we're going to look at. This is the main one you really need to change. If you're trying to rip those supports off and they just don't come off, stuck, it's because this distance right here between the plastic support and your part are too close together. So let's bump that up to 24. I'll also change the bottom to 24, even though we're not quite using it. And as we reslice that, you can see there's a bit more of a gap here. You could probably go up to 0.3. That's up to you. Again, print some small things. If you got a big piece, you can always move that piece down with the adjustment tool, so you're only printing a small piece of it, and you can test it out a couple times. Now let's clean up some of those supports and other things in here so we're not using so much plastic. And first thing we're going to change is the base pattern. We're going to make it hollow. Don't see much of a change here, but it will show up a little bit later. And let's see if I can find it here. Top layer interface, base pattern. We are looking for tree branch distance. There we go. I think it's that one. Let's take a quick look. Support diameter. Nope, not that one. You can always click this little arrow and it'll put it back to where it should be. It's this one. We're going to change that to 1. And if you notice, now our support, oops, got a little crazy there, didn't I? Turn it there. Now you can notice we've only got one circle or one wall here on our part. So we've decreased the size of that, and that comes down. Now this big ugly brim, let's get rid of the brim. We don't want an auto brim, so we'll turn that off. And we'll also get rid of the brim width. So when we reslice that, we're just printing straight there. If you have problems with supports falling off, you can turn that on if you want to, but those usually stick pretty good and don't seem to have much of a problem with. And that is my secrets for supports. Now if you're lucky and you have a multi-material printer like the AD5X, prime towers. Prime towers are printed in the back. Let's see, let's change colors here. We're going to change the filament color to something different for that block. And now you can see in the background here, as I scoot it over, we have our prime tower. And as it switches colors, it drops off into the prime tower. And that uses a lot of stuff. I'm not a big fan of prime towers. I only use them when I'm doing white and black and sometimes red. So let's make a few changes before we get too far down the line. So we'll enable prime tower for just a minute. And on infill, scroll down here, flush into objects. So that way, if it needs to, it'll put the colors inside the blocks, not on the tower. Also make sure we flush to the supports, and then I'm going to go back here and uncheck the prime tower. So give that a try. That gets rid of one thing on the plate that might fall off or flop over and cause your prints to get ruined. Now I'm going to scroll over to others, and there's a few things we want to clean up, a few more things. Save us some time in printing. Real quick, I'm going to turn off the travel. And if we look, brim is set to auto. My little pieces don't require a brim because it's on auto. But if we were to use, say, Mickey Mouse, brims help keep your object on the build plate. I would tend to use Mickey Mouse ears, but for most things, I would say no brim. Don't need a brim. And your thing should print okay. Now, how do I make it look, the overall look of the printer piece, look not so liney? I like to use fuzzy skin. And I like to use it on contours only. That's the outside part. And then I use, and you can mess with these, they're all different sizes, the fuzzy skin distance of 0.3 and the thickness of 0.2. It gives it just enough texture so it doesn't look too bad. And it hides the lines. Let me find if I've got a print here. Let's try this one. And see if I can bring you up to the picture here. There we go. If you look at it, it's got a little bit of texture, but you can't see the layer lines. Might show up a little bit more because of the coloring in this. But you get an idea. You can see it's got a nice texture. Kind of matches the top. Kind of matches the bottom. So let's take a look at those settings. So as you can see, we went with contour and the 3 and the 2. And now we get a nice little bit of texture on our print. You can play with that. You can make those numbers bigger and smaller and all kinds of neat stuff. And those are my settings that I like to change when I'm setting up a printer. One last tip, after you get all these set up, click on save, and I can never remember what to name this. So what I have found over the years, the best way to do it is to scoot over here. I like to put in today's date. And then if I change the size, I can put that. And if there's any other comments, you can add it. But by using the date, I can always figure out where I am. I can go back to this one in May. If I change these settings and realize that I've completely messed things up, if I have a date, I can go back to the date and change those settings. So there you have it. I hope that has been informative and you've learned a lot about slicer settings and why I picked those particular settings. In the comments, I've linked to our Facebook page that has a printable PDF with those settings in it so that you can print it out and take a look at it. I hope that helps you. Have a good evening, and we will see you later. Bye.